Hi everybody, I'm TC and welcome to my channel. Regular viewers to my channel will notice the super budget gaming focus we've had. So far we've looked at two different GPUs on our Dell Optiplex 9020. The full spec of which, if I haven't mentioned it before, I apologise, but let's go over it now. The full spec is a i7-4790, 16GB of DDR3 running at 1333 MHz, a SATA SSD drive, and 16 lanes of PCIe 3 support for our GPUs. We've observed in some of the newer games the CPU is not letting the GPUs we tested reach their full potential. This is particularly noticeable in the newer games such as Space Marine 2 and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Now, I'm not saying that every single i7-4790 system will behave exactly like this one. Different motherboards might be better at holding higher turbo speeds, different RAM speeds will give more bandwidth, and if one has a K-series chip, wow, then a decent overclock can make a huge difference. But if, like me, you don't have any of those things, and just a Dell Optiplex 9020, or maybe you don't have any kind of gaming PC at all and you're looking to build one, or you're wondering what upgrade path you can choose from an old machine now that we're right in the middle of a RAM-pocalypse. I think the question I'm really posing here, and I will attempt to answer that with this video, is here in the UK in early 2026, is it possible to build a PC which can give us 40 FPS in more demanding games such as Space Marine 2 for under 250 quid? And I'm talking about, old-fashioned, legitimately rendered frames, no frame gen technology used here. We will look at frame gen technology in another video, but right now I'm focusing on traditional frames generated. Now, obviously, you've figured out that this is possible, or else I wouldn't be making a video about it. And here's a little sneak preview of what we've got coming up. I just couldn't resist putting this in here. I love the way this looks in this light, and especially with our MSI GTX 980 in there. It's just MSI cards of the mid-2010s. They were really something beautiful. You'll notice this is a familiar case. It was the super cheap case we used in episode 1 to house our Dell motherboard, which is now safely back in the original case, leaving this one free for our new ultra budget machine. To the super sharp-eyed among you, you'll notice this is a CyberPower PC case, and thus not for general sale. However, I have a Game DS case which is 99% identical to this, both in style and quality. So what are we looking at here? Well, you're looking at an HP IPM17-DD motherboard, which currently has a Core i7-6700 on it, which is a 4-core 8-thread CPU. The default clock speed of 3.4 GHz and boosts up to 4 GHz. It was released in Q3 2015. Now, I couldn't find a huge amount on the internet about this motherboard, so I asked a slop generator, and it told me that it was used primarily between 2015 and 2016 for desktop HP models like the Pavilion 550 and the NV750 series. It is designed for the Intel 6th generation processors only and uses the Intel H170 chipset. Now, thankfully, the motherboard is ATX standard, having a standard ATX power supply connector and standard mounting poles. It also has a full 16-lane PCIe slot and a single-lane PCIe slot. These are both revision 3. You can see I'm using the single-lane PCIe slot for an NVMe adapter, as I'm actually running out of storage options. On the back, we only have very few ports. There's audio out, there's Ethernet, and there's a few USBs, and 2 HDMI ports, notably lacking any display ports. But that's okay, because we'll be using plug-in GPUs anyway, not the inbuilt graphics. Now let's take a quick look at the BIOS here, and you'll notice we can change virtually nothing. It's super basic. We can't even change the fan profile, which was really annoying because by default it runs the fan at 2800 RPM, which is really loud. I had to buy 2 fan speed header reducers here from Amazon just to make it tolerable. I have no idea why, as the CPU temps are always very low. Now, for some reason the capture card has put a weird green hue on everything. That's not actually present on the actual screen, just some quirk of the capture process. Now, the 6th generation Intel Core chips in general are usually paired with DDR4. However, this motherboard takes DDR3L. This was a deliberate choice, as during Rampocalypse, DDR3 prices remain relatively cheap. For now, anyway. You'll notice I said DDR3L, and that's because this is low voltage DDR3, so normal DDR3 won't work here. And this is where we can run into trouble. You see, CEX, that wonderful high street retailer of second-hand computer hardware here in the UK, yeah, them, I use them all the time. Sadly, they do not distinguish between DDR3 and DDR3L. So if you want low voltage DDR3, you have to just order DDR3 and hope you get the right stick. The alternative is eBay, of course. I have seen a few 16GB kits, 2x8GB, of DDR3L go for about £20. Now, those of you who are really paying attention will notice I'm actually using SODIMM adapters here. And this is because I already had 16GB of DDR3L SODIMMs, and these adapters cost me a total of £12 for the both on Amazon, so worked out slightly cheaper than buying dedicated DDR3L. These adapters work great. It's DDR3L, it's running at 1600 MHz, seems to be completely stable. So if you have DDR3L SODIMMs, consider these adapters. Now, this particular motherboard I purchased off eBay for £26. I can't actually say if that's a typical price, so your mileage may vary. The Core i7-6700 sells for 36 quid on CEX. And we're using a 250GB SATA, well, sometimes it's SATA, in this case actually it's an NVMe, but it's exactly the same whether you buy SATA or NVMe SSD from CX, they're both 8 quid. And our case, as I said earlier, it's actually a CyberPower PC one, but I'm going to say this is a Game & Diaz 35 quid case from Amazon because they are, to me, all the same. They're they look the same, they come with the same fans with the same LEDs, and the build quality is exactly the same. Our PSU here, believe it or not, cost me a whopping £18 on Amazon. It was marked as like new, and this particular brand is the RPG Rampage 550. You might think that's a bit dodgy, but I've had this PSU for over a year now, and it's been powering quite a number of different machines with different hardware config, and it's been absolutely rock solid. It's also, unlike some budget PSUs, it's got some weight to it. You know, it's not completely lightweight and throwaway. Here's a complete price list on the screen, just so you can see everything and it's all transparent there. Right, let's look at some games and see if jumping 2 generations of Intel Core i7 CPUs has unlocked some FPS with our budget graphics cards. And it's at this point that I think I should interrupt. Hi, this is TC from the future. And, well, I've completed all the testing on this machine, and I got all the figures, which I'll share with you on screen right now. And as you can see, this PC isn't really that great, and I can't in good conscience recommend it. Okay, allow me to explain a bit more. So whilst a i7-6700 is 2 generations newer than our i7-4790, the reality is it's only about 10% faster at best in gaming, as you can see here. It's also a complete dead end when it comes to any kind of simple upgrade path, being as this motherboard only supports the 6th gen Core i CPUs. And if that wasn't enough, the prices I've used here are frankly unreliable. There is no way I can guarantee getting one of these HP motherboards for £23 or even at all. And with all of these factors combined, it's just really not worth it. Even if, like me, you had 99% of the parts already and you only had to buy like the motherboard and the RAM adapters, it's still not worth it in my opinion. Therefore, I've revisited what's possible for our approximately 250 quid budget, and I've come up with this. And here we have a AMD Ryzen 3 3100. This is a socket AM4 CPU, and like both other CPUs we're comparing against today, it too has 4 cores and 8 threads, but it's a little bit newer, being from 2020. It's got a base clock of 3.6 GHz and a boost up to 3.9. Now, being a Ryzen 3, it is of course a budget CPU, but it is a lot newer than our old Intel flagships we were looking at, so it should offer reasonably equivalent performance, maybe slightly better, and consume less power doing so. Now, we are having to use DDR4 for this build. I've gone with DDR4 2400 MHz sticks. DDR4 is going up in price. Slower rate than DDR5, mind. And at the time of writing, CEX is selling 8GB sticks for £18 a piece. So we can still afford our 16 gig. And here is the complete PC assembled. This is the same video from earlier. I know I implied it was something else then. Do forgive the deception. It certainly looks striking like this. I must say this isn't how I would run it if it were my main machine. It is far too bright and far too much fan noise. But this is visually interesting, so I will keep this video here whilst I break down what we're looking at. Well, we know the CPU already, so let's look at the motherboard. We're using an ASRock or ASRock, depending on how you like to pronounce that, A520M-HVS, which can be purchased new on Amazon for around £50. This is an ITX board, so not a lot of room on it, but it does have a 16-lane PCIe version 3 slot, an NVMe slot, 4 SATA ports, and the usual array of USB and audio on the back. More than good enough for what we need. Similar motherboards using the A520 chipset are also available from other manufacturers for very similar prices. So the real question, I'm sure, is why is this better than the i7 6700? Well, for one, I'm absolutely confident you will be able to buy all these parts for the same or very similar prices to what I've paid here, whether brand new from Amazon or secondhand from CEX. Motherboards like this are still selling brand new on Amazon, so there's clearly no shortage of those. But best of all, this is an AM4 socket system, which means although we're starting with an older budget Ryzen 3 CPU, you can upgrade this CPU very easily in the future. It's just a drop-in replacement. You can go with something like the still very good 3600X, the very popular 5600X, the epically fast 5800X 3D, or the 16-core 32-thread monster that is the 5950X, if you can find one of those. The point is, this is a good place to be starting. It's very easy to upgrade AM4 systems. You know, right now we've got a very tight budget, but maybe next month we're going to have a little bit more cash. We can drop in a 5600X. That's quite a big upgrade from where we are here. Or maybe a month after that we can drop in a new graphics card. You know, spend a couple of £100 on an AMD 7600. Those are really fast cards for the money. You could be getting into 1440p gaming then. Okay, the prices, they break down like this. The spec looks like this. I think we're about the same cost as the i7 6700, about there. A little bit more perhaps, but this is a much better place to be. I have, of course, done the benchmarks already, so I'm pretty confident that this is faster than the previous two systems. But I tell you what, I'm not going to ruin the magic. Let's start looking at some games. Now, unlike usual, I'm not going to show footage of every single game, as this video would be incredibly long, as I've run benchmarks on all 7 games for both GPUs and both CPUs here, which is a total of 28. So instead of going through all 28 games back to back, let's just stick to some highlights. With our GTX 984 gigs, we really didn't see much of an uplift with either CPU. I've put a chart on screen now, and as you can see, we saw at the most a 4% improvement going to our Ryzen 3100 versus the i7 4790, which is just margin of error territory. So I'm not going to feature anything from that GPU because it's just no different than all the other videos with it. With our RX 578 gig, however, we did see a noticeable uplift in some of our newer titles, which makes a lot of sense as those were the ones which had the real CPU limitations. We have picked up some FPS in our older games too, such as Red Dead Redemption 2 jumped from the mid-40s FPS to the mid-50s. I think you can see the footage here in the background, which is really nice. But the games I really want to talk about are the newer ones. You know, the newer ones that we struggled with. Starting with Space Marine 2. I know I keep harping on about Space Marine 2, and I do it for two reasons. One, it's one of my favourite games, and secondly, it does seem to be the most CPU intensive game in my test suite here, so it makes sense to focus on during a CPU based review. On screen here you'll see footage captured with the latest patches applied, running on the Ryzen 3100 with our trusty RX 570 8GB. The settings we used are on screen now, and they're the usual low details with FSR unbalanced. And frankly, yeah, look at this. What a difference that has made. By the way, these are completely traditional frames here. I've not got any frame gen on. And as you can see, we're in the same area as always, doing the same kind of thing as before. And we're averaging over 40 FPS at 1080p. We're occasionally seeing some mid-30s as our lows, but much less time than we ever saw with the 4790. In fact, that was pretty much 30s or lower all the time. This one is clearly mostly 40s, and I call that a fantastic result. You know, that's made this game totally playable, and I think that was the challenge I set at the beginning of this video. Can we get this game running at 40 FPS average for around 250 quid? And I think we've done that. I'm not going to stop here. We're going to look at Indie next, because that's another incredibly challenging game. So let's go roll the clip. And the other new game in my test suite, of course, is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. We're in the early stages of Rome again, sneaking around the same courtyard and slapping fascists. We're averaging 35 FPS. Now, you might think that sounds disappointing, considering our i7-4790 managed just over 30 FPS here too. And you'd be right, if not for one thing. On our i7-4790 we were running at 720p. And here on our Ryzen 3100, we're running at 1080p. You can see the settings for yourself on screen now. Yeah, pretty good, huh? Now, for a true apples to apples comparison, I've also got footage of Indie running at 720p here. And as you can see, the FPS average is around 43, which is a really nice uplift. So I think I'm going to say that's quite a winner for our budget Ryzen CPU as well. Here is a chart with the FPS figures for the RX 570 across all three systems. I've included a spreadsheet with the raw figures as well here too. As you can see, every game received improved average FPS with the i7 6700 over the i7 4790. Some a significant percentage, but most of them in the margin of error territory. Now, the average FPS for the Ryzen 3100 received improved FPS again, to the point where every game is now comfortably above my personal, very playable level of 40 FPS. Sadly, I don't have a faster GPU on hand to test, because I get the impression that with an even faster GPU, we'd have seen more significant gains with each CPU jump. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Now, something I did notice in testing, which is a bit odd, according to Intel's website, the i7 6700 should have a base clock of 3.6 GHz and a turbo clock of 4 GHz. I didn't see this CPU hitting those speeds during testing. I'd see 3.7 GHz under a CPU load, such as doing the shader pre-caching, but in gaming, most of the time it sat around 3 to 3.2 GHz and it wouldn't go higher. Now, this does make me wonder if the DDR3 was strangling the CPU a bit. Maybe the i7 6700 would have been faster with a different motherboard with DDR4. However, I stand by the AM4 system as being the better choice overall, as no other socket available right now offers such a great upgrade path. I think socket AM4 is going to be relevant for quite a few more years yet. I mean, I personally am running socket AM4 in my main machine, and I have no intention of going to socket AM5 until the AI bubble pops. That could be 2 years, could be 7 years, who knows. All we know for sure right now is for reasonable prices, you can't buy RAM, you can't buy GPUs, you can't buy storage, and soon CPUs will also be in short supply. Yay AI! Now, one final thing I should mention in closing here is, whilst the Ryzen 3100 system is a really cheap way to do a solid 40 plus FPS in Space Marine 2, and I'm sure many other modern games, it is not the cheapest route. There is one other option. Now, CEX frequently sell what they call custom PCs, and these are, from what I can tell, PCs they have mostly put together themselves with budget bits, such as I've done here. But however, because they are the main supplier of those parts, they can do these bundles incredibly cheaply. For an example, here's a Ryzen 5600G. It is spelt wrong in the ad. But the downside of these deals is they are collection only. So this is a cracking deal, but if you don't happen to be near Romford, then this is completely useless to you. But if you do, then for 170 quid, all you need to add is a GPU, another 8 gig of RAM, and maybe a 250 gig SSD. You'll be just over our 250 budget, but with a Ryzen 5600G instead of a Ryzen 3100. Well, I hoped you enjoyed this video. And if you're thinking of building a budget gaming PC, maybe this has given you some ideas. It took me a surprisingly long time to put all this together, do all the filming, script writing, editing, and I think by the time this video is published in April 2026, prices will probably have gone up, and since I started working on this back in February. For example, I actually noted that a 256 gig SSD is now £12 on CX, not £8 anymore. So apologies if you do go add this all up and it is slightly more than stated here. Rampocalypse is really making times interesting. Anyway, stick around for the next video where we'll be looking at how many FPS you can get these days for a £25 GPU. It only remains for me to say thank you so much for watching. Come back and join me, TC, for another ramble very soon.